Honorable President, distinguished representatives, it is a great honor for me to participate in this annual discussion. The question of the adoption of a gender perspective to transitional justice processes is central to the work of my mandate. In its 2021 thematic report, this rapporteurship examined the multi-layered aspects of the adoption of a gender perspective in transitional justice processes. The report examined states' obligations, addressed emerging challenges and opportunities, and offered guidance to states undergoing political transitions to provide adequate and comprehensive redress to women, girls, and people of diverse gender identities who were victims of serious human rights violations through the adoption of a gender perspective in the conceptualization, design, and implementation of national transitional justice strategies and mechanisms. The report notes how the First Truth Commissions ignored manifest violations based on gender and sexual orientation and gender identity. Although significant progress has been made in this area over time, there is still a general lack of focus on general orientation and gender identity in the work of many Truth Commissions. It is essential to achieve a gender balance among Commission members, establish thorough training processes, account for a broad typology of violations, conduct gender-sensitive public hearings, and develop a proactive strategy of support and confidence building to encourage women and LGBT persons to provide statements. The typology of violations used in their methodology must adequately capture the victim's experiences and include gendered conduct, broad definitions that are not limited to physical injuries, differentiated impacts of violations, records of both primary and secondary violations, and their effect on both primary and secondary victims. A cross-cutting, systematic approach to the issue of violence against girls, women, and LGBT persons and its differential impact is critical to the success of transitional justice processes. Truth-seeking initiatives must contain an explicit reference to examining the causes and consequences of sexual and gender-based violence, establish organized structures that allow for mainstreaming and specialization, ensure that the typology of violation includes broad definitions that are not limited to physical injuries and account for differentiated impacts, and adopt proactive dissemination and communication strategies. The explicit incorporation of a gendered perspective in reparation programs is also crucial and aims to provide redress for sexual and gender-based violence and to identify reparation decisions that may have a differential impact. For reparations to be adequate, categories of violations and victims to be repaired must not reproduce patterns of gender discrimination and must include primary surviving victims and their families without restricting the notion of family to a rigid, legalistic, or culturally dominant concept. Reparation measures must take a holistic view of gender and gender-based violence, and intersectional criteria should be considered. Expansive conceptualizations of harm suffered by victims of gender-based violence must be developed to register the complexity of said harm. For example, the various forms of stigmatization, ostracism, legal insecurity, and loss of social status and livelihood. Reparation programs must be creative and flexible in order to overcome sociocultural and administrative barriers, avoid evidentiary requirements that exclude or re-victimize victims, and address both the individual and collective dimensions of reparations in order to satisfy the principle of integral reparation. Reparations should aim to be transformational rather than restitutive. It is not enough to put the victims in the position that they were in before the violation occurred, as it does not imply the effective enjoyment of their rights. Reparations should aspire to subvert the pre-existing structural inequality that may have engendered the violence suffered by the women. States should identify measures with differential impacts between the sexes and in relation to LGBT persons, ensure that reparation measures consider gender and its intersectionality, adopt expansive notions of violations and victims eligible for reparations, adopt a presumption of related gender-specific violations or lower evidentiary burdens of proof, and ensure that reparation programs are creative and flexible in order to overcome social, cultural, and administrative barriers. Concerning accountability, while the valuable experiences of international criminal tribunals help to shed light on sexual and gender-based violence and raised standards for prosecution in national courts, the impunity of sexual and gender-related crimes still prevails, and there remain barriers to accessing justice for women and LGBT persons. It is necessary to strengthen the capacities of justice operators to overcome negligent and prejudiced attitudes, adopt special protocols for the investigation and prosecution of sexual and gender-based crimes so that they are punished according to their gravity, establish a special interinstitutional model of investigation and prosecution, and incorporate a gender perspective in victim and witness protection programs that address the specific risks faced by victims of sexual and gender-based violence. Regarding guarantees of non-recurrence, states must work to amend discriminatory legal provisions, improve gender representativeness, develop gender perspective training programs for their agents, and establish specialized units in the justice, security, and armed forces sectors undergoing reform. They must also review educational curricula and manuals to include critical accounts of violent pasts and move away from sexist cultural educational structures that reproduce patterns of domination. In addition, states must ensure that memorialization processes are gender sensitive without falling prey to stereotype and incorporate critical analysis of hegemonic patriarchal cultures. A dynamic approach to memorialization that encourages collaboration between educational institutions, civil society organizations, cultural actors, and artists should be taken to promote critical thinking and responsibility, transmit the memories of women and sexual minorities across generations. Finally, I would like to stress the need to ensure the effective participation of women, girls and boys, LGBT communities, and victims of sexual and gender-based violence in the design, formulation, and implementation of transitional justice programs broadly. Thank you very much for your attention.